Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for all showing up and looking pretty this morning. I know most of us had to shower for this, so appreciate that. Wonderful. Well, this is the first of our coffee conversations with Crew Charleston. So, this is going to be more of a short, niche, get into the topics. As you guys have, kind of questions as we're going through, please, everyone's muted currently. But you do have the ability to unmute yourself, which it should be at the bottom of your screen. There's a little microphone, so feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions or want to join in. But let's do a couple of housekeeping items first. So the first is next week's webinar. So we have gotten that scheduled. So that is going to be April 22nd at noon to 1. So it's going to be our larger lunch and learn type format. And the topic is going to be post-COVID construction, paving the path forward. So we've got speakers Janet Bates with J.E. Dunn, Quinn Gaines with Choke Construction, and Amy Weber with Holder Properties to kind of talk us through what are they seeing? What do the pipelines look like? What does construction pricing do in the upcoming months? What are their predictions 6, 12, 24 months out? And are we going to see any slowdowns because folks are not meeting? Are there Zoom meetings? So a lot of aspects that we can kind of dive into on the construction side. So we hope to see you all there. We'll be sending out communication about that here shortly. And then the next coffee. So we do plan to do this again. I mean, it seems like folks are excited about doing something in the mornings, which is great because we normally have coffee with friends, and now we can. So the next one is going to be young guns and how to stay motivated. Because in a market like this, it's unprecedented, it's different, and having any sort of guidance on how we can get ahead during this time is always helpful. So that is going to be featuring Sarah Siegwart with Chicago Title. We've got 2 others still waiting on confirmation that will also join us, and that is going to be April 29th at 8:30. So great, so let's jump to it since we only have 30 minutes here. So special guest is me and my team, Lindsay Halter and John Orr with the Carolina Retail Experts of Lee and Associates. So good morning, everybody. And thank you so much. This is one of my absolute favorite topics with 50 of my favorite friends here. So really appreciate that. Our team is over at Lee and Associates headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina. All we do is retail. Our focus is statewide South Carolina, marquee tenant representation and landlord representation. We have been working together for close to 10 years, and all we do is retail. We know that we work in an office and we don't know how to spell industrial, so we are doing retail. So I'd like to introduce, my teammates, Lindsay Halter and John Orr. I don't know if you guys can see their screens or not, but can y'all say hey?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So great. So let's jump right in. I guess we'll lob this to John and Lindsay. What are y'all seeing in retail today, and how is it different? What's the retail scoop out there?
Well, I think that the first thing is there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. No one knows what to do, what's happening, what's going on. Several of us, I look on the videos and I see some of these people I know have been through other real estate recessions, 2008, 9, 10, the 90s, even some of us back to the 70s. This is completely different because all of those real estate recessions were truly that. They were real estate recessions. It was about real estate. It was about values. It was about interest rates, leverage, liquidity. This is not that. This is a health crisis, and one of the effects of the health crisis has created and is creating and going to create a real estate recession. And as we go forward, we'll see just how long it takes to recover and what happens. But it's interesting because there's money, there's liquidity that's out there for commercial real estate. Now, their tenants aren't paying rent, and some.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. So, what are you seeing from that standpoint, I know that, you know, in a lot of the landlord work we do and a lot of the landlords that we work for, they are publicly traded, they are international. And then we work for some who are a little bit more regional, but super focused. And a lot of it is anchored products. Are we seeing retailers trying to pay? Are we seeing retailers blending and extending? I mean, what are some of those tools that these retailers are using, and what's the overall temperature between landlords and tenants?
So by and large, the overall attitude and temperature is, let's go figure this out. I think the key things are to communicate. The landlords and tenants have to communicate and understand what's going on, what their position is. Are they open? Are they not open? Is the drive-through open, but the dining room not open? Can they afford to pay half rent? Can they afford to pay the expenses? Or are they completely closed down? So the key thing there is communication. And then there's no one size fits all. Everyone is a little bit different. And we've seen all sorts of deal structures, from a furlough of a month or two that's tacked on to the end of the lease term, to blending and extending more lease term, different rent rates, other concessions from the landlord, from the tenant. And the key there is the communication between the landlords and the tenants. They just have to talk about these things. Otherwise, letter and say, we're not going to pay the rent this month because of COVID, then it sets a bad tone and the landlords get angry, and then they have to send default letters. And so there's a small component, probably 20 to 25% of that is happening. But by and large, everyone is actually, it seems like everybody's talking about it now. And of course, that's for the month of April. We'll see what happens in May.
That's right. And, you know, one of the things that we've seen that I think is pretty interesting is a strong divide between how local retailers are handling the situation and how, you know, national and international companies are. So a lot of these local companies that we work with are right now don't necessarily have savings for 6, 7, 8 months. They are obviously, you know, in an unprecedented situation to where they are having to furlough employees. They're having to, you know, deal with this is the center of their universe. This might be, you know, the only income and source of income that they have, and so they've had to shut down or get really creative. And that's one of the things I kind of want to dig into a little bit. Lindsay, what are some of the adjustments that you've seen in some of these retailers, especially locals, who don't necessarily have the ability to just shut down? How have they gotten creative to try and maintain some of that business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's a focus of a lot of retailers and restaurants that we're seeing is, how are they pivoting? How are they adapting? How are they changing? This is certainly unprecedented. It's kind of the word that everyone keeps going back to. You know, a lot of these retailers are having to get creative and think of different business models and how to adapt in ways that they've never had to adapt before. And, you know, there's some of the obvious ones. Of course, we know restaurants are doing a lot of pickup, delivery, curbside pickup, you know, kind of changing their messaging. You know, Papa John's does their contactless delivery with the commercials that they're doing. You know, you see a lot of these folks, you know, even Cycle Bar, one example, they're renting out their bikes to their members. You know, more of a national scale, we've seen something pretty cool was Levi's. You know, they're really focusing on building their relationships with their customers. And, you know, they started doing a virtual music festival, a month-long series. It kicked off at 501 every day, which was the 501 brand of their jeans. And that's something that I think they're using this downtime and this isolation time, if you will, to really build on their customer engagement, keep them top of mind during this period so that they're poised to, when they come out of this thing, really poised to come out on top and really, really focus on customer engagement kind of during this downtime.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. One of the things that we heard about yesterday were some restaurateurs. They still have relationships with local farmers and are sourcing a lot of their products locally. And so they have contracts with these farmers. And so part of one of their ideas to continue these revenue streams is to sell groceries. Like they're selling eggs from John's Island. They're selling, you know, local cheeses. They're selling some of those products that they already have contracts for in an effort to try and keep those, local producers from having to throw some of this stuff away. And I thought that was very interesting as far as a really strong pivot going from restaurant to grocery, because there are only a few sectors, and I think that's important for us to talk about. There are only a few sectors that have actually won during this whole process. So, you see a lot of folks have had to totally shut down, and sales are down, 80, 90% or 100% in some cases. But the winners with over double-digit increases in sales, grocery, pharmacy, C-stores, because that's all that's open. And now what was interesting about the C-stores, the gas stations, was that they're not selling gallons of gas, but they're still up over 15% in sales by and large because of folks going into the actual convenience stores portion of their sales, which is where they make all their margins. So we have seen folks who are drive-through focused and who are in the grocery sector and pharmacy sector that have been really big winners during this, which is fine. But that also means that you get a section of these tenants who are more aggressive in doing deals, because that's what we're looking at is how are we going to fill our pipeline? What's coming up next, and how can we get ahead of that? And those are the players who are active right now, looking for new locations and pushing the envelope in some cases. And I don't want to use the word predatory, but I will, because they are seeing that there is no one else moving at this time. And so they are being extremely aggressive in new sites. That doesn't mean you're going to get the rents that you did 4 or 5 weeks ago from these folks, because they see that they are some of the only folks who are still moving. And that's because they had, larger cash piles just ready and waiting for an opportunity like this to be moving forward. Now, that is not your locals and regionals. That's not your franchisees. Those are going to be, more of your larger national scale folks. So I thought that was very interesting and kind of worth noting. So John, how is the retail sector going to pivot post COVID-19, and how quickly do you think we see the market coming back?
Well, that seems to be the $1 million question.
I ask you the hard ones.
Right. Yep. And I think it's interesting because we've already seen retailers, by their very nature, are incredibly adaptive and have always pivoted. And I was reading about there's a national movement to help small businesses, particularly restaurants, and apparently it's headquartered here in Charleston, which is really interesting. And so what we've seen is that the people that own these businesses, it's not just an office they go to work, but it's their life's work. And be it a restaurant or whatever type of small business in the retail sector, these people are doing whatever they can do, whatever they have to do in order to keep their employees paid or on the payroll, or and then to also pivot into, in the restaurant, selling groceries are a great example. I mean, 2 months ago, we would have never considered pulling up on King Street beside Hall's Chop House and buying an uncooked steak. Just never crossed any of our minds, but they're doing it now.
Because they do such a good job.
Right? They do such a good job there. So those kind of things, in selling groceries and meeting the demand, it's really interesting that the direction this is taking, because it's going to be really interesting to see how the ones who were on the bubble, who didn't choose to adapt, and I'm thinking of Sears, and there's a whole long watch list out there of some of the national retailers who've been on the watch list for a long time. I'm curious to see how this happens, because the shopping habits are going to change even more after this is over and as we come out of the woods, so to speak. But it's going to take some time to re-inventory. For example, a restaurant has to go buy all new inventory, and if they flip the switch on tomorrow, you have inventory and you have employees that you need to hire or rehire and train. And so there's 60 days, maybe 90 days to actually get back up to speed and get open. But you've also got to, I mean, think about it, if you open 1,000 restaurants and you've got to deliver 50 cases of beer to 1,000 restaurants, you can't do that in one day. So there's a logistical component to this that I think many people don't really consider. So it'll be interesting how retail changes.
Well, and I think the ones that adapt and, all these questions, is retail dead, even pre-COVID, the retail apocalypse, and to John's point, the Sears model, the Kmart model. I mean, if you don't adapt, if you're not evolving, if you're not changing, will you make it? Will you come out on the other side of this? And so I think you see those retailers that are taking this time to change their business models, I think will really prevail on the other side of this. So it's just about change. It's not, there's opportunity that will come from this.
Absolutely. Well, Lindsay, something I think you brought up that was very interesting this morning was, a lot of these retailers and international retailers are tracking how their stores and store sales are doing in China. Because right now, we are about 10, 11 weeks behind China. And Nike has already, put out there and publicized that they're seeing foot traffic at levels pre-COVID already today. Which I think is one of the models that we need to use kind of going forward. So what are those items and things that those retailers are doing to get people to feel comfortable again to go back into the stores? Because I don't think that it's an immediate, hey, let's all rush out to the stores, because those of us who were germaphobes before are really going to be germaphobes now. Because you start kind of thinking through, oh, well, someone else might have just sat here and it hasn't been wiped down, or just some weird stuff like that these retailers are going to have to adapt and make sure that it's a safe environment for the customers, and that they publicize how this is a safe environment for their customers. Which kind of brings up my next point: is football going to happen? I want to go back to a football game. I mean, this is in everyone's mind, and I think that there are going to be some levels of safety that these types of environments are going to need to help to show and communicate and be, very vocal about what they're doing. So this could be anything from, making sure that people don't sit right next to each other. There are seats between people, that there are screens to see if you're sick before going in. If there's, if you have a temperature, maybe you're not allowed in. I think there are going to be those types of changes to our daily lives in the upcoming, 6 months to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think these businesses are going to have to be very vocal about what types of changes that they're making for folks to feel comfortable again. I do think there's going to be a little bit of revenge spending. I know that, looking at all my budgets and how much I've spent over the last month, and I was like, wow, I saved a lot of money. But it's not because I wanted to. It's because I literally couldn't go swipe my credit card, and that was an issue. So Amazon has been obviously a big winner in all this. But I think for folks to feel comfortable being vocal about what changes that they are going to actually make to keep the customer safe are going to be very important. So John, and I want to touch on that, what you had spoken about before about what retailers fall out. I mean, do you think all of those who were on the bubble, do you think they go away and this creates more of an equilibrium between a landlord's market and a tenant's market?
Right. That's a great question, Elise. I believe that 2020 will go down in the history books as the year of the Great Reset. And we've seen rents grow at unprecedented levels annually, year-over-year growth for almost the last 10 years. And the rents have gotten out of equilibrium with the sales volumes. And so we need to reset the rent. But we've got a lot of struggling retailers, and in February there were probably 15 to 20% of all retail businesses that weren't going to make it through the end of the year. And now that number is probably closer to 30 or 35%. And the ones that were never going to make it are certainly never going to make it. And we're going to see there's another component, and unfortunately, I'm afraid that this is going to be the mom and the pops and the ones who don't have the financial resources to stick it out for another few months. And even with the government help and the SBA, I just don't think that they're going to have the ability to be able to continue this business enterprise. So we'll come out this time next year, we'll look back and say, okay, it was probably 30% of all retail businesses that just closed up and went away. Now, I think that creates long-term opportunity for the industry. It'll help reset the rents. It'll also help reset the operations. And the people that are going to win and lose are the operators who have financial strength and health and are very responsible with their money. The others that are going to win are ones who have fantastic operations. And so I'm thinking of, the in-class operators, the people you go to buy Starbucks, you go buy your coffee from. They've been through COVID in the Far East, and they know what it looks like. They have the financial strength to weather the storm. So we're going to see that group do very, very well. But what we're going to see struggle is these people in the entertainment industry. Anything that involves a gathering, movie theaters, entertainment is all the buzz now, the bowling alleys and all those things. I mean, it's just not the same if you go to a bowling alley and there's plexiglass on either side of you, so you can't, mingle with all the other, how do you go out to a bar and social?
Yeah, does sharing a pitcher of beer, does that go away?
Right. College football.
When I ask the question, I see a couple no's. I see people shaking their heads. Okay, good. We're on the same page here.
The fish bowls when everybody drinks out of the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
The whole.
I love that stuff. I do want to have time for some questions here. We've got about 7 minutes left. I got one from Scott McElhaney. Thank you for joining us today. He would like us to elaborate on the reset in rent. How far back do you need to actually rewind rent? Is this 5 years ago, or is it even farther? Do we know?
Scott, I think that's a great question, and I always love Scott's question because he's so forward-thinking in this industry and business. I just love talking to him. And I think the answer is we just really don't know yet, and it's going to be really hard to tell where those rent reset levels need to be because we don't know how long this is going to last. And I think that there's a correlation to the longer this quarantining of America continues, the further those rents need to reduce and reset. And when I say reset, I think that, we're talking about small reductions in rent and maybe some other form of rent abatement, and it's going to extend the term because the landlord wants quality and quantity of income, and the better quality, better quantity of income with a better tenant. And when you replace a weaker tenant with a better tenant, then you have a longer term. It shores up the financial strength of the project. The biggest challenge that we've seen, and again, there's about the same number of lenders from what I hear as landlords who are agreeable to mortgage furloughs, deferrals, because, if you think about it, you can't foreclose on 70 or 80% of the commercial real estate in America. It's just ridiculous. So, and a lot of these other banks, especially the smaller banks, they want to figure out a way to work this out. So we'll see once we come out of the woods, so to speak, and get America back to work, we'll see more and more cooperation between landlords and tenants and lenders to help figure out a way to make this work. And everybody will take a little bit of a haircut. And there'll be people that will come out of it. There'll be people that give the property back to the bank. There'll be tenants that just throw up their hands and say, no mas, I'm out, and go from there. So I don't know the answer to the question just yet, but I think that'll be a great one to have in August or September. We'll know more then.
Yeah. Well, and I do think it's an interesting point. There are going to be different sectors who don't drop as much. So like those retailers who are absolutely blowing the doors off right now, the grocery anchored centers, you still see heavy traffic volumes in these centers. Where you don't see any traffic is King Street. So I think those types of areas that are more soft goods focused, I think you're going to see more of a hit on lifestyle and on King Street type shopping versus the traditional grocery anchored shopping. Just because those traffic patterns, people have to go to the grocery store and they have to go to these areas. Where they don't have to go is where they think they're taking a risk, which is like a lifestyle center or a King Street or something like that. So I think that is going to be very interesting. One of the questions we have here from Jamie Haley, thank you. How are we addressing the aggressive growth of Amazon, and what will that do to retail, and what does that do for your industry? Jamie, that's a great question. And this is something that we've actually been, kind of talking around and in great detail since before COVID happened. Now you do see an increase in online sales since this has happened, because that's the only place that we can spend our money right now, besides the grocery store. But overall, online sales have been hovering right around 10%, because people really do like the experience. Some of those concepts that are recession online proof are not recession proof. And those are going to be the restaurants. Those are going to be the places that you're spending money where you don't necessarily have to. And so I think we are going to see those bounce back. But for right now, the money that we otherwise would have spent at, getting that pitcher of beer is now going to be spent on, upgrading our cable package or Netflix or, Amazon, whatever it is right now. But I do think, and I think we all think, that this is going to be temporary. We are going to come out of this. It's going to shift consumer shopping patterns a little bit. But I don't think that online retailers win, because we have now all seen and tested, we can't all just stay inside for 4 weeks at a time with our kids. We can't do it. It's impossible. I don't know, there may be some people here that are like, oh my gosh, I love it. This is great. But I will tell you that, not everybody can handle, doing that and not going out and seeing friends or having those social interactions. So while online is an absolute competitor in this, in the retail sector, I don't think it ever overpowers the want and the need and the desire to be social. So that's a great question. So we have 2 minutes left here, and that was kind of similar to Melvin Williams' question about, do you see online retail increasing? That's a good question. And I think it kind of touches on that last one is, those online and those folks who are kind of starting up right now, who are online only presence, now they are competing with those folks who have refused to go online and now have to, because of the situation that we're in. So the online competition for the spending online has doubled, if not tripled, because these folks can't be open. So they are absolutely putting more money into their online presence. But this increase in competition does not lead to, more sales for those online only folks that we've seen. And a good resource that we're kind of using, I do want to kind of touch on this to make sure that we stay on time. We've got about a minute or so left here. But John and Lindsay, what are some of the resources that y'all are looking at daily to try and stay ahead of what's next, since the news changes every hour? Our outlook changes every hour.
Yeah, every morning you wake up, it's completely different. One that I found just recently that I thought was interesting is a website called within.co, and they have an entire COVID-19 dashboard. They update it daily. They've got graphs for different sectors within the retail industry. They do a little narrative every day, so I would highly recommend looking at that. It's very interesting. Just kind of seeing the different graphs, the different trends, and kind of the spending patterns. And then I think they even had some traffic patterns in there as well for the various sectors. So that was within.co. I thought that was very interesting.
That's a great one. I also rely on Google News. I've got Google News set up to track different retailers and different trends in retail and retailing, and it's proven to be very helpful, because you can pick and choose what news you get to see, and none of the fake news shows up in there.
Is that a filter? Is that a filter? All right. Well, here we are. We have made it to 9 o'clock. So thank you, everybody, very much for joining us. We did just have another question come in, which I think is interesting. And if you guys have 1 minute, I do think it's interesting. The question is, what are you anticipating for vacancy, Charleston and in general, leasing those vacancies post-COVID? Do you need to do anything differently? Great question. And I do think that this is going to be an important one. So in Charleston, for the last several years, we've seen occupancy levels hovering, right close to 96, 97%, and in some cases up near 99% in some of these submarkets. And that's not necessarily because every business was super successful in blowing the doors off, but it was because of that, flock to get retail space because there was money out there to spend. We are going to see an increase in vacancy in Charleston. It's just going to happen. Not everybody is going to make it out of this, but at the same time, it could be tenants who were probably close to the end, who were thinking about, stopping their business. This just sort of fast tracks a little bit of that. So those, concepts who may not have been as successful as they originally planned, who thought their rent was too high and trying to, negotiate that, they now have an opportunity to get out. So do I think that we see those drop down to, under 90%? Probably not. But because Charleston is one of those markets where you do have high retail sales volumes once we're all back to normal. And then to answer and address your question about leasing those vacancies post-COVID, I think that this, and one of the biggest changes that we've seen is that people are adding language about pandemics. You look at, a lot of these leases, you do not have the ability to claim force majeure. It is not covered in this. And then also a lot of the business interruption insurance that a lot of these retailers had, this is not covered. And it's unprecedented. And we've seen a lot of not only tenants addressing this in various ways, asking for, reductions in rent if there's ever a pandemic again, but we've seen landlords trying to protect themselves that, they don't necessarily have to do a blend and extend the next time that this happens because there's a plan. So I don't know, Lindsay and John, if you've seen anything else very quickly before we wrap up here.
To piggyback on the vacancy question, we'll see more vacancy, but we'll also see, just like we saw in 8, 9, 10, we will see a flight to quality. So the A site, the better site, will continue to be the A site and better site. It will take just a marginal, if any, reduction in value or rent. And I saw Will had a good question about the loan to value and property values and what happens. I mean, I think that those lenders are just going to say, hey, you didn't cover your LTV. You either need to put in an extra 20% cash equity or we're going to take the property back. But I believe by and large, most of these lenders will either furlough or allow a breach of that loan to value or debt service coverage ratio or whatever the particular situation is in order to give the owner time to backfill the tenant and to basically reset the loan. And hopefully there's enough built up equity. And I believe that most of the real estate out there probably has enough equity. We've been very, very smart as an industry in our leverage amount. So hopefully there's enough built up equity in there to be able to reset these loans at maybe a higher debt service coverage ratio in order to be able to keep it so we don't have just a massive implosion of the industry. But I would say that everything is going to be, we're going to come out of this stronger and better and smarter. And it's very exciting because it feels like now we're getting close to the point where it's flattening out in Seattle and some of the other things. And it looks like, not to make any predictions, it looks like we could be back to work in the next few weeks here. So.
This is excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. Cheers to everybody for making it today. I appreciate you joining us with your coffees or whatever you got in there. But I do want to say, see you next week. This is our post-COVID construction lunch and learn. It's going to be at noon, April 22nd. We will be sending out the Zoom link. So hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you joining.